we are continuing to discuss Atlas Shrugged, the main characters and their psychology. And today we turn to one of the villains. We turn to Stadler. And we saw with Hank Reardon, we saw his ascent, that he just grew throughout the novel. With Stadler, Ayn Rand shows us the opposite, that there is free will and a person can make um, corrupt choice after corrupt choice. I want to call it bad choice because there are errors of knowledge. But with Stadler, we see bad choice, corrupt choice after corrupt choice, and the refusal to introspect, which leads him to where he deserves, to hell. So we see his descent. So I thought I would just, because we're talking psychology, I am just going to start with his history very briefly. At age 27, he wrote a treatise on cosmic rays, which demolished most of the theories held by earlier scientists, we're told. At age 30, he was recognized as the greatest physicist of his time. I mean, everything would be revolutionized in science because of his work. And at age 32, he became the head of the Department of Physics at the Patrick Henry University. And people said, perhaps among the phenomena of the universe which he is studying, none is so miraculous as the brain of Robert Stadler himself. And he has Robert Stadler corrected a student when he said free scientific inquiry. He said the first adjective is redundant. And the final one, at age 40, he addressed the nation by endorsing the establishment of the State Science Institute. He wanted to, quote, set science free of the rule of the dollar, unquote. And they built this marble edifice for him, the State Science Institute. So anyway, I don't know who wants to go first, but to talk about his psychology. This is a brilliant man we are talking about.
You know, um, the title of the course is the psychology of the characters, but
Yeah.
we do as much philosophy, if not more, especially me, since that's my my field.
And they're integrated, Andy, philosophy
Thank you.
and psychology. Oh,
They
yeah.
sure are. But yeah, I mean, again, Ayn Rand. So many of Ayn Rand's characters, they're flesh and blood. They're alive, and they're also living embodiments or archetypes of philosophic principles. And Stadler is a Platonist, and Ayn Rand's showing us Plato in action here. Of course, Stadler's idea of intellectual elitism, that only a very few people who are really interested in knowledge and want to learn and are smart enough to learn. The rest of us are a bunch of ignorant, unwashed dolts. And Stadler has a great line. What are you going to do when you have to deal with people? Because people are not only ignorant, but they're often militantly ignorant. It may be stupid, but certainly ignorant and willfully ignorant. They don't know because they don't want to know. And so science will never be supported by popular choice. And so the ignorant dolts have to be forced. They need a philosopher king. And notice Stadler, on those premises, you necessarily move towards statism. You devolve towards statism. You need the philosopher king to rule everyone else, and to do it by coercion. That their life will be better if it's governed by Socrates, for Plato, than their life will be if it's governed by themselves. And so the State Science Institute, right? We got to liberate from the marketplace, which is the will of the people voting with their dollars every day, because they're not going to vote for knowledge or science. So we're going to force them to do it. He's on his way to being a little, mini dictator of science, and then he devolves further and further. In his power, becomes a arrant power luster. He's going to set himself up as the Duke of Iowa. With the Project X, with this destructive machine. He's going to intimidate everybody into bowing. They're going to be serfs bowing down before the Duke of Des Moines, or wherever in Iowa this thing is. He's going to be a feudal lord, and so we see this great mind led by Platonic premises to seek power over the masses, because the great minds are the ones who are the only ones who have knowledge and wisdom, and the ones who should rule, and everybody else needs to obey. You see him led to his own destruction by his Platonic philosophy. And again, brilliantly done,
Yeah. And
integrated journey.
he had a wonderful teacher. Stadler's teacher was John Galt. John Galt, as a student, speaks to Stadler when he's going to endorse the State Science Institute and talks to him and tells him how wrong it is. He doesn't listen. He makes corrupt choice after corrupt choice, which is what destroys him. And he is culpable. If you act, I reread all of the scenes with Stadler for this. And early on, he knows that you have to use force with these mediocrities, with these ruffians of business. And you get this horrible contempt. Even when he's with Dagny, he says, the dollar chasers. He doesn't like the dollar chasers. And Dagny says, I'm one of them, Dr. Stadler. So Shoshana.
Yes, okay. I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that we see with Stadler, along with what Andy just told us about his deterioration and his becoming power hungry, is that his own mind, his process of thinking is deteriorating. And this is horrible, because he's really smart. So he has a long way to go. And when you look at his psychology, we see how that works.
Yeah.
He's one person who could be really dangerous. He could figure out who John Galt is, because he even knows his name. And if he's listening to himself when that book comes out, Floyd Ferris's book that he's supposed to be endorsing, and he thinks, oh boy, I hope that person doesn't see it. And he's, we know afterwards he means John Galt. He says, no, he's got to be dead. All right. Then later on, he's thinking, who invented this motor? Must be someone who's got to be dead. Well, how many people and he actually means, thinking of John Galt, I wish he were dead. And then when he sees John Galt, he does want him to be dead. Well, if he just, by then, of course, he knows the facts, but he could make that connection. Let's see. Nobody's taught what happened to that third student. Oh, here's this motor. Well, you remember in the Fountainhead, Dominique and Winand looked at Cortland, and they could tell who designed it. We don't need the signature. There's a sense in which, well, that's what he was supposed to be the expert on, is who could have done this. And he does know who could have done it, but he thinks that person's got to be dead. And he thinks that his third student's got to be dead. So that
could to think.
Yeah. He could think, well, gee, maybe he's not dead after all. Maybe he's hiding out. Maybe he invented this motor. Maybe that's where he is. But because he doesn't really want to know, he doesn't make the connections in his own mind. Now, what you just mentioned about his tactless slip, except it's not exactly a slip, it betrays his actual thinking about talking about the dollar chasers, some dollar chaser. And she says, I'm one of the dollar chasers. And he says, no, you're a naive child, and you don't know what kind of world you're living in. Well, he's the one who doesn't know what kind of world he's living in, and he's not naive, and he's not a child. And he wanted to set science free from the rule of the dollar. Well, yeah, guess where the dollar is up there as the sign of the place. It's as if he's proclaiming himself as he's got his institute, and that's the opposite of a proper, healthy, honorable, rational society, which is what John Galt is building. There's a sense in which in the novel, James Taggart is the anti-John Galt, because he's always using a foghorn to summon the fog instead of trying to see things clearly. He's trying to not understand. Well, Stadler also is trying to not understand. He's been working at it for a long time, and he's succeeding to the extent that he hasn't done good work lately.
Right.
And that he doesn't know how to, he thinks force works. Well, how's that working out for you? You've got the State Science Institute where they're doing things in your name and using your discoveries for bad purposes and making you stand there and read speeches that other people wrote. Yeah. It's not, he should understand that what he wants is, if he wants power, he's got no power. And he runs off to try to get power. The Duke of Des Moines, which is stupid.
Right.
And he doesn't even handle it as well as a normal criminal would. You know, they say, you know, where's your gang? What gang?
That's right.
He
That's right.
doesn't
But
Just
you're right.
have
You're right.
any weapons.
You're right.
I'll say one thing and then I'll pass it to you, Andy, that he was troubled by John Galt for several years and he learned how to kill it in himself.
Yes.
To the point. So what John Galt said to him really bothered him, but it's always there, like a guilt that he holds in the back of his mind that kind of percolates through at times and
Yes.
pull it back in. So it's not that he didn't hear John Galt. Andy, rock and roll.
Yeah, you're right. He's liberated science from the rule of the marketplace and subordinated to the rule of government force.
Right.
And you go back to the point I was making before about the Platonic premises of Stat. You know, when that shows him the motor, and he realizes right away, what a work of genius this is. He says to you, realize the problems in theoretical physics, you know, that this would have had to stop. If he could all that, why would he, I don't remember his exact words, but why would he waste his time with some piece, elaborate piece or complicated piece of plumbing? He shows his disdain for technology. And Dagny's response is brilliant. She says, well, maybe he wanted to live on Earth, Dr. Stadler. And you see Stadler, the platonic contempt for the things of this world, and this yearning for this higher of knowledge, the theoretical practical dichotomy.
Right.
Split between theory and practice. He's concerned with theory, not with practical applications. And by the way, Ayn Rand, of course, a brilliant Aristotelian, knows the history, and she's glorified the United States as the nation of the Enlightenment. Well, who's the greatest figure of the American Enlightenment? Benjamin Franklin, who made these advances in theoretical and our understanding of electricity, and was until he could find practical application for it, to improve human life, one of which was the lightning rod. So, the Aristotelian, Franklin's a perfect example of wanting to apply theory to promote human life on Earth, whereas the Platonist, he has no interest in promoting human life on Earth. He's just pure theory. And Ayn Rand is expressing her disdain for that Platonic philosophy, showing why she's disdainful of it. What it leads ultimately to and the attempt to impose wisdom on the ignorant masses, impose it from the intellectual elite. So again.
Yes, but he's not entirely dead. I think that one of the things we see in his response to Dagny, and he knows what she is. He knows what she is, and yet he responds to her mind, and he looks to her for understanding, and she's a bright spot in his life. So the fact that he responds to Dagny means that he still got it within him, and the way he responds to that motor, and he says, how wonderful to see a great achievement that isn't mine, and wanting to look up to something, and she has to tell him, even though she doesn't want to give him the sanction, that she also wants that. And that's a healthy side to him that's not gone yet. And so that's why, he's got a lot of pain, because he looks at Dagny and he wants her respect.
Yes, that's exactly the point. He wants to think he's still the Dr. Robert Stadler that he was. As he goes downhill and deteriorates, he's so hungry for someone to see him the way he could have been. And he's not there anymore. So it's a fraud. And Dagny doesn't see him that way. She's just observing him. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when it's time for the broadcast and he sees Dagny, it's as if, it's described as if someone who was in a brothel and had accepted the nature of his surroundings until he's found there by his wife. And well, it's not that he has a romantic attraction to Dagny, although, that actually in this novel would not be such an unusual thing, but he sees her as someone whose respect he wants and for whom he feels he has a connection, and this doesn't fit. And so he turns away. Robert Stadler, a number of times we're told that Robert Stadler's the scientist.
Yeah.
And the scientist turns away. So if the scientist turns away, then Stadler's not Stadler. He's not himself. And he doesn't want to give up completely. So it's almost as if Dagny is a stand-in for Galt, which is why he's the one who tells Thompson and the gang, watch that Taggart woman. She's of his type. Follow her and you'll find him.
Right.
And then, of course, the plot moves because he's correct about that.
And he's filled with contradictions because he wants a motor of rid metal that can take the high temperatures. So he's a damn materialist. You know, you can't live without material goods or an instant.
Not to mention when Ferris shows up in his office and he thinks that they're going to discuss the fact that it's cold.
Ooh.
Okay. Because he doesn't really like that.
Down for a period of time because they were out of oil at the Institute.
Because of the Wyatt
reclamation project, so-called. Andy.
You know, reality impinges it, doesn't it?
Yes.
You know, acts itself on people if, you know, they yearn a higher world this one. And Stadler paying the price for, you know, chaining the mind here to government. Yeah, and he's in a certain way you can compare him. I know I hesitate to just bring this up speculatively to compare him to Gail Wynand in Fountainhead. Wynand's a tragic hero. There's no doubt. You know, his virtues I think enormously outweigh his substantial moral flaw, and which is Rourke loves. But you know, Stadler's not that guy. I mean, he just evolves into pure evil. So we see Dagny, you know, willing to give him the respect he craves, and understandably so, justifiably so. Tragic hero in the sense of what he could have continued to do. Stadler, some great things. Theoretical science, which has, you know, enormous value. Make advances in theoretical science. Actually, they can be applied, you know, in real to make human life better on Earth. He mentors John Francisco d'Anconia and Ragnar Donald. Hugh, you know, tells Dagny he competed. You know, Stadler and I competed. You know, to be like a father figure. To these brilliant young ones. Stadler was a professor for many years, presumably teaching a lot of students. He did a lot of things, even great things. You know, teaching physics to these three young geniuses and you know, teaching them, you know, the principles of physics at, you know, at a very high level. He did some not only good things, he did some great in his life, and so he, you know, had continued on that path, he would have been a giant. But he made very and you're right, somebody, you know, Steinman showing up. Your genius doesn't guarantee you that you're going to make morally upright choices.
I want to say something about Stadler in the sense of the way that we see the goodness in him, even though, as Andy's saying, he's tragically conflicted, and like Wynand, he's made big mistakes. Now, one of the things which we already mentioned is the way that he loves talking to Dagny. And when she wants to talk to him, he says, oh yeah, I'm coming to New York. He's not coming to New York. When she wants to ask him a question, he wants to talk to her. And we're told that he remembers giving an interview to a novelist, you know, for a profile in a magazine, and how she seemed to understand. And then the magazine profile was stupid. And for him, it was as if a patch of sunshine had disappeared. And then we actually have a description of what it's like when a patch of sunshine disappeared. And that sets up the goat in the Project X scene. So he is someone who's got values. And I even thought that bit about being interviewed and thinking that someone understands and is going to cover it, this might even have been an expression of Ayn Rand's own feelings about when other people seem to understand her and then misrepresent her, one, or the fact that Ayn Rand herself interviewed J. Robert Oppenheimer, Robert, genius, you know, in an office that looks like Stadler's office, and that he liked her. You know, he liked her and he said, let's do another interview. So I think that she's put something of a good aspect of Oppenheimer in here and an aspect of herself. Mm-hmm. And that's a positive, which of course makes his fall even more tragic. That's one, is the Dagny situation and the wanting to be understood. The other is that he's a big help in moving things along, in that he tells her about Quentin Daniels. Quentin
Right.
Daniels as someone who is smart, and he says he wouldn't work for me, so he's probably the man you need. But just before seeing the gratitude in her eyes, which he had, and respect which he'd craved, he throws it away. So one, he's got he knows Quentin Daniels, and he can't hold on to his recommendation of Quentin Daniels. And we know that Quentin Daniels was a good choice because later on, John Galt says, you know, when you picked Quentin Daniels for my understudy, that was good. Well, she didn't pick Quentin Daniels for his understudy. Barbara Stadler did that. And so it's in a sense as if Galt is complimenting Stadler's judgment there, but of course it's his judgment of Quentin Daniels. And he's right about that. And Quentin Daniels is both intellectually sharp and also, as we find out, he's figured out the principle of the strike before John Galt ever came to call on him. So he's an anti-Stadler too, and yet Stadler recognizes the merit in him. So these are good things, and yet he keeps slipping. He keeps slipping with coming up with his dollar chaser. He keeps slipping, of course, all the way to his big speech to Galt.
Yeah, it's evasion, not so much slipping. Right. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, he slips, you could say he slips into evasion. I wouldn't say that he when it comes to force, maybe he jumps in whole body, but other times it's as if he retreats to that. But boy, when he speaks to Galt, and he says, you know, you must be destroyed, it's as if now it's all clear. And Galt says, you've said everything I wish to say to you, which means he, unlike James Taggart, knows who he is, and who he is very evil, and he's dangerous. Right. He's dangerous because he's smart and because he knows what's going on around here.
He runs out saying, no, no, no. He starts out by saying, John, I couldn't help it. This is the speech when he sees John sitting in the window ledge as if he was sitting in that when he was in college, you know, sitting on a railing. And John is completely silent through the whole confession. And it wasn't a deliberate confession because you just see the whole dynamic of how he changed. John, I couldn't help it. I couldn't help it. You can't blame me. And then he gets to the point where, and you've got to be killed. You know, he deteriorates because John says nothing. He talks and he talks and he talks and he sees his own nature and it's no, no, no. And he's pounding on the door to get out. But I want to go back to one other scene. And that is that he was very lonely. And Hugh Axton gives us some amazing information. He said, you know, Francisco and Rania were his only love, but John was his only passion, and whom he regarded as his particular heir, as his future in his own mortality. And he was to do postgraduate work. John Galt was to do postgraduate work under Dr. Stadler. Dr. Axton says, I would have killed to protect these three students. The man to kill was Robert Stadler. Of any person, of any single guilt for the evil which is now destroying the world, his was the heaviest. He's the conduit. He had the mind to know better. His was the only name of honor and achievement used to sanction the rule of the looters. He was the man who delivered the power to the looters, guns. John did not expect this. And he said after John spoke to him that Stadler looked changed. And Axton says, I hope that I shall never have to see again a change of that kind in a man's face. And Stadler at that point said, I'm so sick of all you practical idealists. That's Andy's point about the Platonists. I turned away, Axton turned away. I knew I had heard a man pronounce a death sentence upon himself. When you change your premises to malevolent premises, it's a death sentence on yourself, and it's just slow death by slow self-suicide.
And it's both spiritual and material, because he's turned the Institute over to the guns, and he can't do anything about Floyd Ferris's anti-reason book.
Right.
Okay.
So he chooses not to do anything. And he doesn't think his name would mean anything at that point either.
Stadler still understands because he tells Ferris about his garbage book why do you think what you think? That if Hugh Axton was still here, no, no reputable academic journal in philosophy would review this book or take it seriously. Stadler knows Hugh Axton would rationally annihilate the garbage arguments in Ferris's book, and Ferris's response is beautifully, coldly malevolent when he says, well, Hugh Axton isn't here, but Stadler knows. Stadler knows rationality when he sees it, and he knows irrationality when he sees it, but he's robbed himself of his own weapons to combat it. The free thinking mind has to be free, and now he's subordinated to governmental force.
Yeah. And yet you keep thinking, I think he keeps thinking that he hasn't completely given up. And yet, as we see, every time he's pushed to it, he's afraid.
Yeah.
He's afraid, and he knows that there are words he's required to pronounce, and he can't say them. And boy, when it comes, Ferris, he can't defy Ferris. And when it comes time to see Project X and to give his sanction to it, and the newspaper guy says, tell them the truth, they'll listen.
That scene is amazing. He had the eyes of John Galt, a little hint of it.
Yeah.
Oh, that.
Yes.
Or Andy, do you want to talk about that?
I was just thinking about the scene with Ferris again, because he can't refute Ferris's book. He's not a philosopher. Hugh Axton was a philosopher, but even if he was a philosopher, he can't come out against a book from the State Science Institute because he's tied himself to that institution. He's tied himself to the government to government force by his own choice. So he can't, even if he was a philosopher, he can't refute, this garbage that Ferris puts out. Anyway, we see that scene in the cornfields, when the young reporter recognizes the evil of Project X and he wants Stadler to speak out. Yeah, we see another step in the devolution of Robert Stadler into unmitigated evil. But for 1 second, he understands what the kid is saying to him, and he knows it's right, but he's already committed to power lust, and he tells the guards, "Get this traitor." I don't remember exactly what it says. "Get this traitor, away from here." And he keeps taking those steps into power lust. What's that?
Ferris does that. Ferris is the evil one.
Yeah, but Stadler repudiates the kid. He doesn't.
Yes,
he won't speak out the way the kid wants him. The way the kid wants him to. And you see him taking step after remorseless step into power lust, which leads him to his own destruction and the destruction of the countryside. The Duke of Iowa, the wannabe Duke of Iowa, crushes the countryside of Iowa for many, many miles around in his unbridled power lust. Brings himself down and the rest of that community.
Yeah. So on that scene, I think this is brilliant of Ayn Rand to bring in the justice here. That here, Stadler has duct taped his own mouth and his mind. He won't think. He's evading. And right at the moment when it really matters, he's speaking to the nation. He could do what this newsman says. I'll read the words here because I think they're important to see how Ayn Rand puts it right into Stadler's face, the contrast. A young newsman, Dr. Stadler, tell them you had nothing to do with it. Tell them you had nothing to do with it. Tell them what sort of infernal machine it is and for what purpose it's intended to be used. Tell the country what sort of people are trying to rule it. Nobody can doubt your word. Tell them the truth. You're the only one who can. And Ferris is the one who says disloyal young punks with treasonable motives and sends him off to lose his job with the Unification Board. But Ayn Rand's brilliance of putting that moment of justice, that is the contrast, free will. He could make a different choice at that moment that may make a difference. And he chooses not to speak up. He zips his lips.
Yeah, well, it could be that if he started defying, there are people there with guns, and that would be that'd be the end of Stadler. And in a sense, that would be a more noble end, for him, because he's there. He shouldn't be there, but at the very least, he could withdraw his sanction and get shot, and that would, at least he wouldn't be supporting it. I'm just
Oh,
saying, because I think he's correct in being, he's correct to be afraid, but the boy is also correct in he could say something. He could
and he
say
could have done
something.
that all along. That's the huge problem, that he never
Mhm.
spoke up. He
Yeah.
could have. Why do you think he could have spoke up? Reardon Metal, he could have spoken up. And Ayn Rand just sees that once you make a bad, a corrupt choice and you grow it, it destroys you. You don't give yourself that courage to speak anymore. So he,
Especially when that choice is power lust, and you want to initiate force over your
oh, he does. He
over
does.
millions over millions of people. When you choose evil on such a vast scale, and when you have a mind like Stadler's to know better, the amount of evasion you have to do to keep going on that path is massive. And so he ends up being indistinguishable from Jim Taggart. He's evading on this monumental scale, and his guilt is even worse, at least by the end of the story, because he knows so much more than Taggart. He's so much more intelligent. He's brilliant. His evasions have to be even more massive than even a small.
He knows what that device is.
Yeah, he does.
He knows what that device is, and he knows that there are these, drunks who don't know what it is sitting in front of it, and he thinks that he can control them by the weapons that he has, which he doesn't. So he vastly misjudges not only what his big plan is, but what he's doing in that moment, and so he precipitates it.
And maybe
which it's as if the worst thing that he imagined came true after all.
right. And maybe one of you remembers the words where it can't be reasoned 24/7. Do you remember that line where he said, you can't be perfect. You can't. It's a great quote, and I'm looking for it. So
I don't remember the exact words.
Oh, if I can find it, we could end with that. But
what are you going to do when you have to deal with people? Is a great line too, because it shows his contempt for every man and every woman. They have to be ruled. They can't be reasoned.
I got it. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ellen. Go ahead.
You allow no moments of weakness. You don't allow for human frailties or human feelings. What do you want of us? Rationality 24 hours a day with no loophole, no rest, no escape. Don't look at me, goddamn you. He's talking to John Galt in that.
And he's sounding like Jim Taggart.
I'm not afraid of, right, listen to this though. I'm not afraid of you anymore. Any longer. Do you hear me? I'm not afraid. Who are you to blame, you miserable little failure? He's talking to John Galt. Here's what your road has brought you. Here you are, caught helpless, under guard, to be killed by those brutes at any moment. And you dare accuse me of being impractical? Oh, yes, you're going to be killed. You won't win. You can't be allowed to win. You are the man who has to be destroyed. And John Galt is the silent reflector there. You've said everything I wanted to say. No, when he leaves the room.
Yeah.
So, any final thoughts? I know we need to wrap up on Dr. Stadler. Final thoughts, Andy? You want to rock and roll?
Well, like I said, it's the tragic flaw theory here comes to mind. With Stadler, great mind, great achiever early in his youth as a theoretical scientist and as the mentor to these three young geniuses. Very high level of accomplishment, but destroyed by his own not just his power lust, but by turning away from life on Earth towards making that theory practice distinction, interested only in theoretical science, not interested in practical life on Earth, condemning every man and every woman because of their interest in practical life on Earth, condemning them as just selfish and materialist, irrational, can't be reasoned with, have to be ruled by force. What are you going to do when you have to deal with people? They're irrational. People are irrational. And so the genius, the great men of rationality like me you have to rule over them. And he's destroyed by his own philosophic errors, by his own tragic flaws. I think that's the way I would sum up Robert Stadler.
Okay. And is there anything else that you wanted to say about him that might not have included?
I don't like them.
Okay, that's good. We can make that stronger. That's really cool. And Shoshana.
Well, I think it's really important that he's a scientist. I mean, that's mentioned so many times. He's called the scientist, the scientist, the
Yeah.
scientist. And so, you know, and Hugh Axon's is the philosopher, but he's the scientist. He was the really good scientist. And so, in a sense, he was the teacher of John Galt, which means he taught him some physics. And so he contributed to John Galt too. You know, and except, you know, of course, that's something to be proud of. And so, because he knows what science is and he is a thinker, it's especially tragic and poignant when his mind is what he acts against. And so, you know, what can you do when you have to deal with people? You have to use force. Well, force gets used on him. Force gets used on him. And I guess what you see is that Hank Rearden, and I guess this will be the last thing since we were talking about Hank Rearden tells Dagny that she shouldn't have gone to talk to Stadler, which is interesting because Hank Rearden doesn't grasp everything about the sanction issue, but he knows there's something wrong with talking to Stadler. And well, there is something wrong with dealing with Stadler if you're giving him values to help him keep on pretending he's still Dr. Robert Stadler when he is now a destroyer. That's correct. On the other hand, it's not true that she caused any harm to herself from dealing with Stadler because he, well, didn't do any good with telling him to take back what the Institute said about Rearden Metal. And it did do some good to get the name of Quentin Daniels, because then she can go after Quentin Daniels, who is a help. Now, of course, you could say if Quentin Daniels reinvents the motor, then the world stays alive longer than it would have, and that goes against the strike. On the other hand, because she identifies Quentin Daniels, John Galt finds out about him and goes and gets him, and that's to the good of the strike. So it does work out that Dr. Stadler has contributed to something that moves our story in the direction of the world learning its lesson. But that Dagny herself wants to like him. She wishes she could like him, and she can't. Now, I think that Andy doesn't even wish he could like him.
Well, not by the end. Not by the end.
No. No, I know. And also, there isn't really a contradiction there, because she doesn't like him. She wishes that she could like him. She wishes that he were such that she could like him. She's benevolent. You know, she wishes the world were such that someone like Dr. Stadler would be someone who rose to the requirements of his mind and used his mind 24/7.
Right. And if we
lived a better life.
If we were his students, you know, when Galt, Francisco, and Ragnar were his students, we would like him, we'd respect him, and maybe even love him as a mentor and a father figure.
Yes.
But not what he becomes by the end.
Right.
He wants to kill Galt.
Yeah. Right.
So I think that, or anything else, Shoshana?
No, that's fine. I think that, again, it's just brilliant that Galt says to him, "You've said everything I wish to say to you."
That was incredible.
Yeah.
So my big takeaway from this, again, it's what do the readers take away from a Dr. Stadler, is to really, yes, you want to embrace technology and realize what it's doing for your life, but much deeper psychologically is that you want to monitor your own mind, and you want to see those moments when you want to push things out of awareness, not form the words, keep them on the periphery, and you have those inkling or those nudgings in the back that want to break through, and you refuse to think by your own choice. And that the cost of that is the process is you are self-destructing, and the cost is that you will hate yourself. You will come to hate yourself because hidden in the background, always there, the motor is always on, but it's a horrible motor, is your evasions, all your evasions waiting to crash through, as they do at the end when he wants to kill John Galt. And that's the opposite of embracing your values. And I think the contrast between a Hank or a Dagny or a John Galt or any of the heroes or heroines, and to see the horrible, we see the rise of Hank Rearden, as I said at the outset, and we see the descent to hell of Dr. Stadler by his own choices over time, and by his commitment to those choices, and how he just devolves into a killer.
And it's important to point out, but that by the end, both Stadler and Jim Taggart want Galt dead, and then, and there's the reason for it is Taggart's a nihilist through his entire life, and all he wants to do is destroy. And by the end, Dr. Stadler, this magnificent achiever, is nothing but a nihilist, also, seeking power, lust, and destruction. And of course, Galt is the antithesis of that. He's the man who creates values, par excellence, and makes human life on Earth possible.
Right. And that's because they've destroyed themselves. Fundamentally, because they've destroyed themselves, so they want to destroy the good in the world out of hatred of the good for being the good. Shoshana?
Yeah, it's just one more way he's the opposite of Galt, is that Galt, take over, tell us what to do, right? And and that's what Galt will not do. And Stadler, take over, tell us what to do. Okay, here we go. He wants power. He wants to be the person telling other people, forcing other people to do what he says to do. So it's one more way in which he's an anti-Galt.
So I think we can say goodbye to Dr. Robert Stadler in many more ways. Goodbye.
Well, Ayn Rand said goodbye to him definitively, didn't she?
Yes. Yes, that's true. And he is the cause of it, both physically, he's the cause of his own death, both mentally and physically. Very good point, Andy. The physical.
Yeah. And she even talks about the pain, the pain of his death. Short, but very painful.
Yeah. Deserved, well deserved. He's earned it.
Yes.
He's earned a lot of guilt. No unearned guilt here. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Shoshana Milgram and Dr. Andrew Bernstein, and I'm Dr. Ellen Kenner, and we are wrapping up with Dr. Stadler, Dr. Robert Stadler, who is no longer with us, we're happy to say.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. This was fun.